more direct, more ambitious, and we're about to have liftoff.
Stay hydrated. They get their drinks next to them. It's going to be a sweaty fight between these two players, depending on the opening that we get. Will it be, again, a solid draw, or will we have more? 1e4? That gives me hope. It's the Sicilian.
Sicil for the kill, and Magnus, not just the Sicilian, playing pawn to a6 on this last move. That is ultra provocative, doesn't fight for the center at all. It allows white a free hand. It's a bit of a move order trick. It's kind of asking white to open the middle of the board, because then black has much more options. But I've nearly never seen Magnus employ this one, and I think already the frustration's building. He doesn't want another quiet battle. He wants fire on this board.
So rare at the highest level that I often forget its name. I believe it's the O'Kelly variation of the Sicilian. It can transpose into other lines because in the Najdorf Sicilian from the black side, you often include this move a6 with the pawn going up to d6 next. So just asking Wesley, do you know all the variations? Do you know what transpositions can occur? Maybe I can catch you off guard. And Wesley, he is spending some time here. He said he needs to avoid time trouble against Magnus Carlsen. I think playing d4 in the center right now is a good way to avoid that long-term pressure.
And it's so important to not burn too much time in the opening, because the critical moments will arise, the position will get messy, mistakes will happen, and the player who has those extra seconds in those moments, that's often decisive in this one. But Wesley does take the decision finally after spending a bit of time with that second move surprised by Magnus. He does take out the bishop to e2. With the black pieces in the O'Kelly, it's about getting that d5 break in early on. That d pawn from d7 moving 2 steps ahead. Is that something that Magnus is already thinking about? Or would you say his approach should be to start developing first before a central break?
Normally, you want to get the pieces out, and I think this last bishop move from Wesley So might throw Magnus off. As you say, normally black wants to break open in the center very quickly. You're kind of waiting for your opponent to commit, and you react accordingly. But white hasn't committed anything. White is simply developing. White's next move is natural, obvious. If black does nothing, white will just castle his king. So certain pressure on Magnus Carlsen right now. If he lashes out a move such as d5, black's queen would be forced out early. I think that might backfire. So I'm expecting a pawn push here, or black's knight to come out, maybe the queenside knight. Either way, Magnus, he's the one to launch the surprise. The O'Kelly, I must admit, I've forgotten that name too. It's that rare, as you mentioned, Robert. But OK, now we're headed into more traditional waters. An open Sicilian, potentially, depending on Wesley's next move. He pauses. Will he take with the pawn? Will he take the pawn with the queen? Will he take it with his knight? Lots of options here for Wesley So.
And in standard Najdorf territory, we see white capture this pawn with the knight, and black's pawns are in normal positions. He does, in fact, take with the queen here. So if the black knight steps out to c6 to attack the queen will slide back in front of the dark square bishop. And I have to say, this kind of reminds me of some games that Magnus has played from the white side of this opening. So Wesley saying, you can do it, I can do it too.
That was his kind of mantra in the previous game. He did mention, Wesley, that these two had a battle in the previous game, but with colours reversed from 2 years ago. So he's just copying Magnus's opening. He just says, OK, you often play 1b3, I'll play b3. You played the English opening a few years ago against me. I'm playing it this time. And now a variation, as you mentioned, Robert, that Magnus is quite renowned for, as the white queen most likely going to step back now, either to e3 or to the d3 square.
Following the best player on the planet when it comes to opening preparation, perhaps not such a bad idea, but really interesting there. The memory that Wesley has about all the games that they've played, even years ago, and just how they look at openings at the very top level. The knights come out, and I was expecting Wesley to blitz out the next move quickly. While he does pause a little bit, and he chooses another square. Instead of lining up the queen against a dark squared bishop, he lines it up against a light squared bishop. To me, this is a bit of a surprise, because putting that queen on e3 later on invites white's rook to the d line, which is opened up already. But this looks like it's not only going to come in the way of the bishop, but that eventual rook as well.
He does want to develop his dark square bishop, so he doesn't want to be in its path. And right now, Wesley, he can just develop his queenside knight. He controls the center. That's the good news. Earlier, we were talking about a pawn break for d5 for black. You often want to accomplish that in Sicilian defenses, but Wesley has that square under his control. But now we're getting into sort of a Sicilian dragon territory, where Magnus is going to develop his bishop to g7. That's a long-range piece, and it's going to be a fighting game. I don't think it's going to be particularly solid from here on out.
Yeah, this is the most promising in terms of the rich possibilities for both players. The most promising position we've seen so far. And something happened. Did Magnus knock over a piece? Players made eye contact there. Magnus looked over for the arbiter, but okay, back to pure focus, pure concentration on this board as Black's bishop has been fianchettoed. But yeah, this one, so many pieces on the board. This imbalanced pawn structure that we always see arise from the open Sicilian. I'm excited. I think this one, it feels like Magnus is poking Wesley a bit. He's saying, come at me, I'm provoking you, try to do something. But will Wesley be provoked?
That is the big question right now. Who gets provoked and how much risk are they willing to take? We're going to check in with Danny, who is on site. He is in Toronto, bringing us some updates. Danny, 2 kg fights, but this one promises to be a fun one. What do you make of Wesley's opening approach so far?
Yeah, thanks. I've been, like everyone else, I guess a little surprised and intrigued by Wesley's opening approach, going back to playing 1b3 in game 1. A lot of people see the conversation on Twitter. I joked that he might play 1b3, but I said it on the heels of a comment that I was very serious about, which was I didn't think Wesley would go back to e4, one, because of his lack of success against Noterbeck, the comments he made to me that he wasn't feeling comfortable with his preparation. And it's funny. And then Levy said, well, if he plays e4, we will kind of learn what Magnus's intentions are by whether he plays e5, going into some really well-known lines that Wesley can keep very technical and very sort of risk-free, or whether Magnus would go for a Sicilian. So I guess I wanted to pop on to just say that in many ways, I think that a lot of the anticipation we've had and sort of the intrigue about what the players would be doing at the board is sort of coming to life here. And I'm a little surprised by Wesley going to e4, Magnus playing the Sicilian, but like David just said, I am also, regardless of how we got here, excited about what we're going to see on the board, because I think this is about to be the most exciting game we've had yet.
And Danny, that's an interesting setup for what's been happening. But now that we're in this position, whose style do you think this type of position favors? Is it in Magnus's court because it might be more open, or is Wesley dictating the pace because he is starting with the white pieces and it is closed at least for the moment?
It's a great question. I mean, Wesley plays e4. We know that he, as he said, for many years was a big fan of some of the sharpest, most deeply prepared Sicilians. It hasn't been something he has done as I guess as often in his later years, as we say. He's still a pretty young guy. But I'm going to go on a limb and say that regardless of who styled this favors, I actually feel like Magnus is happier about what we're now seeing on the board. It's a very unique Sicilian. Yes, it's a dragon setup, but you have a couple of very unique features in the position, right? The knight on d5 and this sort of structure is very irritating for Black, but White also doesn't have as much space as you might normally have. The queen is interesting on d3. You see Magnus aggressively playing the pawn to b5, which means he's ready for a fight on the queen side, a very typical Sicilian plan. So is Wesley going to play something like a4 and try to maybe positionally undermine the queen side here? Or will he stay aggressive in the center and allow for an even sharper Sicilian? Things like bishop to g5, put a rook on d1 and e1, and see if you can make something happen. So anyway, I know I didn't answer your question directly. I kind of feel like it favors Magnus in terms of the kind of position he wanted. We also see a little bit of an edge on the clock. So that would be my crystal ball prediction, I guess.
And Danny, I've got to ask, are you missing Levy, James, everyone? Why aren't you in the bar? Why aren't you in the Belfast Love right now?
I'm not in the bar because I got work to do, just like everybody else here. And I saw, I mean, obviously Candy had a good time over there, checking in with the chess pros. Okay, bishop to g5. By the way, excited to see aggression from Wesley. And Levy is over there right now. He'll be checking in soon. Spoiler alert for those who didn't know that, or fans who were hoping to catch a glimpse of Gotham. He's actually over there right now. I think I'm going to head over there at the end of the day. I don't know. I want to be here just in case some crazy stuff goes down. But yeah, and I will definitely be there tomorrow.
That's awesome. Chess over everything, Danny. We've been seeing the fan zone there, and it looks like everyone's having such a great time. What does it mean for Toronto to host this massive finals?
I think for Toronto, the fans feel better this year than they felt about us last year. The Chess.com Global Championship didn't have a fan zone, and in the venue that we're in, we really didn't have any experience for fans. It was, I think, great for the players. We got a lot of compliments, but the fans weren't really pleased. This year, again, we didn't go as far as we'd like to go. Ultimately, our future is, I think, going to have even better experiences for fans. I'm hoping to deliver on experiences that are fans on site here with the players. Who knows? Maybe even with an ability to scream and cheer and shout when they see things they like. There's a lot of ways we think we can pull that off. So I think Toronto is super pumped to be hosting this event like last year. Obviously, the Candidates is coming here, so they're becoming quickly one of the most globally visited cities in the world in regards to elite chess. So I think they're pretty pumped. And shout out to all the fans who showed up and made it. As we said, it was completely sold out. The bar looks packed. And there they are, right there. And we see a little bit of simplification. Sorry, I'm in a chess brain. I know I'm normally the guy who's taken us away into the more off the board stories, but I'm pretty fascinated by what's going on here because I have a feeling my prediction was wrong. I made a prediction out there that I thought Wesley would be so solid we could very easily get 4 peaceful results before Armageddon. But I have a feeling we're going to see some spice on the board here, so that gets me excited, and hopefully the fans will be pumped to see that too.
Yeah, that was really cool to see so many people in Toronto excited about this finals and in the fan zone. We saw Aman in there as well. And I think I spotted Maxime. Not really sure if that was Maxime. But it looks really cool. Danny, we will check in with you. Lots of trades have happened in this one. A very different position. We're going to deep dive into this and keep us updated with everything that goes on there. Meanwhile, we do see a lot of trades on this one, but despite that, an ambitious approach, just like Danny did predict H4. I feel like we lost him too soon because he would have loved to say something about this move.
H4 for the score. Wesley is just trying to expand on the king side. He can also do the same on the queen side. And Danny was saying we might see some spice. Variety is the spice of life. We're getting all these different openings. And it's Wesley who's taking it to Magnus at the moment. Why not? He controls so much more of the board. Right now, the queen side is undeveloped for Magnus. And H4, put that pawn up on H5 and just ask some questions to Magnus. Are you really going to develop your bishop to F5? Yes, you kick my queen away. I can just move my queen out of dodge, and then I'm still going to play H5, maybe F4, maybe G4. I can throw all my pawns up because there's no attack against the white king.
Maybe A4 on the other side of the board to try and create more weaknesses. The material is level, David, but the pawn structure seems to imply that if anyone is playing for this advantage, it has to be Wesley, and all caution has been thrown out of the window with that last move.
Yeah, this is Wesley so at his best. This is Magnus Carlsen taking some big risks as he does attack the white queen, which will surely just slide back. And there we go. Wesley does play that move. I just wanted to mention the pawn structure. We've talked about white being super flexible on the king side with these 3 pawns potentially moving, mobilizing also on the queen side. It's purely because in the middle of the board, white has this beautiful pawn on d5. In an endgame, it might become weak because it's very far extended, but for now, it clamps down on 2 of black's pawns. Black can barely challenge ever in the center. If you cannot challenge in the center, white simply has more space due to how far advanced this pawn is. The board is cut in half, essentially, so it's going to be very hard for black's queen, black's rooks to travel between the king side, queen side, kind of switch focus very quickly, whereas white's rooks will be able to switch to the center. They will be able to kind of zoom behind their pawns if lines open up on the king side. And okay, Magnus prevents the advance of this h-pawn. I think that's a really important move. Otherwise, black would have been feeling uncomfortable with this king. But either way, I'm slightly biased here towards white's position, just due to the pawn structure. Often this kind of scenario really uncomfortable for black. This is an eternal weakness.
That d5 pawn that David pointed out is what defines the position and gives any chances, if at all, to white here. And it's not as easy as it might look looking at the material balance. We see more pieces being traded off. But again, this keeps the position alive. With the light squared bishop off the board, white can start targeting even with the f-pawn moving forward. That last move by Magnus has weakened his king side a little bit. And with the light squared bishops gone, it will make black more vulnerable to attack than white.
And Wesley's keeping his options open, but look at what Magnus has just done. He's sacrificing a pawn right now, because if that bishop takes the black bishop on f5, You're not taking with the pawn. That opens up your king. That's not a good decision. But queen takes f5, and after bishop takes e7, I think Magnus is going to flick in a bishop f4 because that dark square bishop for white is going to have a hard time getting back into play. For instance, queen to d4, rook to e8. If you think you're getting away with bishop to f6, there might already be rook e4 ideas here, getting your queen out of line with this bishop on f6 and queen d3. I want to throw in one more little funny tactic. Bishop h2 check. When they're pieces in line with one another, look what happens when the piece in between disappears. King takes bishop, rook takes pawn h4 with check. You get my rook as well. White's up a handful of material until you lose your queen. Black is the one who ends up ahead.
Beautiful tactic, beautiful clearance sacrifices there, Robert, but it's because white is slightly loose and white doesn't have time to activate the rooks and go for this pawn. I think, actually, this is just supreme calculation from the world number one right now, Magnus Carlsen. Maybe missed by Wesley, so it does look on a superficial glance that he's simply winning a pawn, but this suddenly backfires, and white, due to the trap nature of this bishop, or actually your move even stronger, bishop to f4, due to the fact white's queen is a bit loose, suddenly momentum black, and Wesley so realizing this, not being greedy, I think dodging a bit of a bullet there. He does shift his rook instead, so still eyeing this pawn indirectly, but black now has at least mobilized.
Yeah, that was a stunning line that you just showed. And what's even more stunning is that Magnus, he just quickly found it, and he finds the tactical way to get out and neutralize the position to the advantages that we were talking. But Rook E1 still keeping the pressure. He doesn't go on for the trades. David, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, why not at least defend this pawn now? Black still has a beautiful bishop, and despite the fact that these bishops, these light-squared bishops, might get traded sometime soon, now white is unable to attack. If white ever pushes forward, black will happily step back, either to the f6 square, g7 square, and actually there's just too many weaknesses now around the white king. White will regret pushing so many pawns. So I think Magnus, just in time, has found a way to stabilize, hold everything together, and these bishops are the key. He's not giving way, he's trading on his own terms. This is really, really classy defense in what we thought was a bit of an awkward position.
And that d5 pawn, which is such an asset in the current position because it does restrict some of black's pieces, and that keeps it backwards pawn e7. Later in the game, it's going to become a target. The rook will slide to c8, and that rook can slide up to c5. If the bishops get traded, the light square bishops, that is, the rook can come up to c4. And suddenly it's that white pawn on h4 that may be a bit loose. So there are going to be some counter chances for Magnus Carlsen here. That d5 pawn, it can be overextended. And for Wesley, he needs to keep up the pace, not just on the board in terms of creating threats, but on the clock. He's down under 6 minutes.
But we were so hopeful about White's position just 2 moves ago. We were talking about all these breaks coming up, White having that d pawn, the bishops looking really good. Where does it come to? What moment does it come to? Or what idea does it come to where Magnus has managed to turn this around to at least an equality?
Well, sometimes the best positional moves are based on tactics, on tricks. And I think it was that one that Robert pointed out, just Magnus pretty much hanging a pawn, saying, that was a free pawn, try and take me, but the tactics work in my favor. And that's where momentum changes. It's going in one side's direction for so long. Suddenly, something throws you off. Suddenly, what you wanted to achieve isn't possible anymore. And then it's momentum for your opponent. And that's how games take this kind of roller coaster effect. And they can be topsy-turvy because often things at this top level are very rarely one-sided. You might be going for a certain goal, you might have a certain idea in mind, but the opponent always has resources to try and throw you off. And yes, Wesley isn't able to achieve a direct advantage, but he's not worse. It's still in the balance, this position. White still has chances, and I like this rook lift.
And the evaluation bar off to the left-hand side of our screen here, it's still in the middle, and it has been both in this game and in the previous ones as well. But Magnus has done a few things in this match. That knight a2 decision, the thumbs up from the evaluation bar. It was a great idea. Here, sacrificing a pawn temporarily on e7, also a good idea. But the best players in the world, they know when to choose their moments. And Wesley knows when not to take a pawn that may be vulnerable. He understands that's biting off more than he can chew. He would be in an uncomfortable position. So Wesley, he is now just under 6 minutes. Magnus about to hit the 7-minute mark. And for Wesley, he's just doubling his rooks on the e-file. I like the way he's handling some of these decisions from Magnus. They may be a bit of a surprise at first glance, but then when he sits and calculates, he realizes, not a big deal. Let me continue with my plan. Let me coordinate my pieces.
And once the rooks do get doubled up on the E-line, there will be threats for Magnus to answer once again with that F-pawn moving forward targeting that bishop on e5. Again, coming back to that d5 pawn that we were talking about, it's just made e7 a long-term weakness, and that's kind of like Wesley's North Star, guiding his play, doubling up on the e-file, placing that bishop on g5. It's all around that e7 weakness right now. Magnus develops, also eyeing a potential rook lift himself once the bishops get traded. The rook could come to c5, attacking d5, or also c4, hitting on h4 at the right moment.
Yeah, and look at the body language. Both players sensing this is a critical game, a critical moment. It's really hanging in the balance. Yes, the knights are all gone, but the pawn structure is imbalanced enough, and the piece configuration is really tense. It feels like one side could crack, and Wesley hesitating here. He's 1.5 minutes down. He does play the consistent, the most logical follow-up to his plan, enacted by lifting his rook up the board. And now, how will Magnus react? Quick pace here, trades off the bishops. Your move, Robert, I think incoming. The black rook on c8 needs to activate. There is, for the first time in this game, the hint of a threat of white's f-pawn coming forward, kicking away black's stabilized central bishop. So Magnus wants to fight against that.
And if white really wants to get that in, after rook c4, you have to first play g3, but every pawn push in front of your king gives control of important squares to your opponent. So I would not be touching too many pawns in front of my king if I were Wesley, but you can't really push pawns on the queen side either. The b pawn is stuck in place defending the c pawn. So I think that if Magnus is given a few turns, he can bring his first rook to c4, then slide his other rook to the c file. And if white can't successfully get this pawn push to f4 to kick the dark square bishop out of e5, I do believe that Magnus will have the better chances there. So Wesley, he'll have to act quickly on the board this time rather than the clock.
Yeah, it's all about that black bishop. If it stays on that beautiful central square, only Magnus Carlsen as black can be better. If Wesley is able to kick away that black bishop from the center, maybe by using a pawn, then things will get tactical, things will get really sharp, and Wesley will hope that things go in his favor. That's why the black rook lands on this fourth rank, cutting across on that nice line. And as you said, Robert, pawn to g3, giving the white king some breathing space, but also kind of preparing that pawn to f4 push. Getting so tense, and 5 minutes each now on the clock. Still feels like we might have a winner in this game. It might be decisive, could go either way. Feels like far, far from the level, the sterile equality we saw in the previous two battles.
And f4 is now a threat, right? Which black has to sort out, because you are targeting the e7 pawn. And if that rook stays on e8, you don't have the defensive resource of falling back to f6 anymore, guarding that e7 pawn. I'm just thinking that can black actually try to fight the threat with challenging white's bishop on g5 with a defensive move like bishop f6 eventually. But for that, you need to move that rook from e8 out of the way. So I don't want to move it to d8. Let's say I double up on c8. Can white actually get to the e7 pawn immediately?
Okay, by dropping back, this is your idea, Tanya.
Yes.
It's a challenge, and this is one of my favorite structures in chess. It looks like black's structure has been broken, but the doubled f-pawns keep the black king nice and safe. I call it the bug house structure because in bug house chess, for those who play, this is the way to keep your king safe. But yeah, it's about whose king is weaker. Here it would be white's, and he does play your move. And tactics potentially in the air. Pawn to f4 might actually backfire if Wesley isn't energetic here. Feels like black's bishop holds the fort. It is the glue holding things together. But it's enough, and black's rooks might be superior to their counterparts. Unless there's a sacrifice on e7, tactics suddenly...
We could invert the move order. That's what I'm wondering about right now. Let's say I take on e7 first, so your queen is in line with the white rooks, and then I play f4. What's going on here? This looks like a messy position because I'm threatening to win a pawn on e5. I have both of my rooks there. You can't play this pawn push to f6 because your g6 pawn will be loose. So now there are questions that Magnus will have to answer if the white's king is out in the open after pushing all those pawns.
Yeah, Wesley, if he goes for this, he needs to judge it correctly. This white king will be weak. There's various ways black can defend here. Yes, Wesley might even go up a pawn, but this white king with queens, rooks, all the major artillery on the board, I mean, this is so double-edged. So, moment of truth. If Wesley doesn't go for this, it might be too slow.
I think I saw him reaching out. It's not the bishop. Again, a more cautious approach here. He's going for a rook trade.
But trading pieces suddenly, we mentioned it. If black keeps the bishop, on this e5 square, black is better long term. And yeah, the black queen might come out at some point. Black can kind of curl up into a ball, put a king on g7, bishop on f6 at some point. I think Wesley might be losing the thread. He's reluctant to take a risk, go forward, but maybe he had to just be principled, be aggressive there.
And it's a position where that d5 pawn is going to be something that white may struggle to hold, because if that second black rook steps up in front of the c4 rook, go up to c5, put immediate pressure on the d5 pawn, and the black queen slides over. Something we could talk about Magnus going for a win, but I like his decision first. He brings his king up to g7, covers the f6 square again. Also, maybe in some positions you need to cover the g6 pawn, so you can push your own f pawn to f6 to kick that bishop out of there. But either way, I like the way that Magnus is handling this, and both players under 4 minutes. It's getting into territory where speed, it can kill, but it's needed here.
Yeah, feels like Wesley maybe just needed to go for that, take a risk, be energetic. After all, you don't beat the best player in the world by being timid, and I do foresee a position where Magnus can start grinding. That's where we know he loves to kind of exert his authority over the opponents, even the best players in the world. If he gets a small advantage, like the weakness of White's far advanced pawn now, we mentioned it, trading everything off, that pawn is weak. So Magnus has a few things long-term in his sights. Wesley needs to act dynamically now.
And speaking of acting dynamically now, I just want to point out that this sacrifice of bishop takes pawn will not work anymore. And that all comes down to Wesley's last move. The whole idea falls apart because that rook from e3, which moved to e4, has actually cleared out a diagonal. And after bishop takes pawn, and perhaps we can show this with arrows, David, that this is the idea that we were vouching for earlier, which gives Wesley the play. Now f4 can be met by a check on a7, which earlier was not possible when the rook was on e3. So Wesley returns the favor, steps up with his king, sidesteps the check, bishop takes pawn, once again a threat.
But he did walk into a new diagonal, which I don't like either, because in the current position, I believe that the black queen can slide to b7 in the very near future, maybe on this turn, with rook c5 to follow, or pawn to e6 in some positions, because the king is in the scope of that black queen on b7. This is actually a nervous territory for Wesley. So Magnus is playing on the queen side, could play with a5, saying my queen's in the perfect location. But I don't think that the white king is fully out of dodge.
Yeah, Wesley's drifting. Look at this, pawn to a3. He's even just parked all his pawns on dark squares, and these could be easy targets for black's bishop later in the game. I really don't like this for Wesley, and this idea of putting the queen on the long diagonal, not just threatening tactics along that line, but also pawn to b4 will totally shatter the white structure later. Magnus, he's upping the ante, upping the pressure. This is a massive weakness. It was white's biggest strength earlier. Suddenly, all these trades, and it is simply weak. Magnus is turning the screw.
He controls all of the pawn breaks in this position because white's pawn structure is actually cemented in place. f4 is available, but we talked about that weakens the white king, and Wesley has not shown that he wants to get adventurous on that side of the board. He does do it now. The dark square bishop, it will retreat to f6, maybe after an exchange of rooks first, as we see Magnus take this rook, but that bishop is going back to f6, and there may be double pawns. I just don't think that's the important thing. The d5 pawn is the weakest. b4 is a pawn break available to black, and that king on g7 will actually be tucked cozily there with 4 pawns in front of it rather than just 3.
Yeah, we've seen it before, that type of scenario, including in a game with Magnus Carlsen against Fabiano Caruana. Yes, the bishops are going to get traded off. Yes, it might just be queens and rooks left, but king safety, it's paramount, it's key. And white's king, far more airy, drafty, far more open than its counterpart. Black's king is the safest king you will ever see. It's just nicely protected, wall of pawns in front of it. I think, actually, despite the evaluation bar only being slightly in black's favor, this one is already on the brink. Wesley has to be so accurate to hold this one now. And quick capture, Magnus has that beautiful wall of pawns now, the 4 pawns in front of his king, and Wesley's forced passive onto the defensive. White's queen and rook, 2 heavy pieces, the best pieces you can have in chess. They're all guarding a mere pawn. This is a sad sight.
Wesley goes into the defense, which means he lets go of an open file as well, where we can see Magnus try to put his own pieces for counterplay. But it all comes down to the clock situation as well. Right now, Wesley's under 2 minutes, Magnus under the 3-minute mark. And despite the level material, despite black having those double pawns, we are expecting this to be a big fight still. Some more critical decisions coming up. There are heavy major pieces on the board, and we know just how deadly Magnus can be with those queen placements.
And we typically don't like double pawns, and black is the only side with double pawns, because in pure king and pawn endgames, it's hard to create a passer. But with rooks on the board, when you have double pawns, you have open files. And why black should have the upper hand is he's been using the c file, and if that white rook did not go right back to e4, he could use the e file as well. So the black king has that that blanket of pawns in front of it, it's a happy piece. The d5 pawn does stick out, but is there enough firepower remaining? That's the essential question for Magnus Carlsen. The d5 pawn can be defended by 2 of White's pieces, but only can be attacked by 2 of Black's. It seems like Wesley is hanging on by a thread.
If Magnus was to put that queen from d7, the first move that came to my mind was queen f5. Just feels like an active square for the queen. I'm pinning the rooks. If we imagine this position with the queens traded off, who does that favor?
Ooh, I think Wesley would love the queens off, because even if White ends up losing a pawn on the queen side, if all of the queenside pawns from A to D file disappear, then actually with 4 versus 3 just on one flank, Black cannot create a pass pawn. That's the one downside of having these doubled pawns that Magnus has right now. So I think actually a rook trade favors Wesley because he'll be safe. A queen trade favors Wesley, he'll be safe. Magnus, if he wants to win, keeps the queens and the rooks on. If you imagine the black queen or black rook ever entering the white half of the board, if they ever land on the second rank, knockout, game over. And I think Magnus needs to keep the tension, try to maneuver, sneak in behind somehow. It's not going to be easy. Should still be a draw maybe with best play, but Wesley is just devoid of a plan. Look at this, he's just putting his king in the corner there. He's just waiting, seeing if Magnus can break through.
I like the move, though, because now he's putting the onus on Magnus, saying, show me what you got. You put your rook on b8, are you really going to play b4? No, he goes queen f5. And maybe he's now more inclined to trade queens because the white king is so far offside. So a queen trade, the rook slides to e8. This is a situation where only Magnus can play for a win, and he's going down this line.
And that's so interesting because Magnus waited for the moment when Wesley's king was at the edge of the board, so not giving enough time to actually come to that f2 square to control all the penetrating squares on the e file. Only after Wesley played king h2, Magnus goes on for the rook pawn endgame. Is there hope here for Black? We always talk about the Magnus touch. Can he create something in this one?
It's definitely possible. If anyone can, Magnus can. He squeezed water out of a stone more times than we can count. And this last move is really classy. It's actually a pawn sacrifice. Black giving away a pawn. White can actually take twice on this square, but the black king is coming. It's all about rook activity. Black's rook on an open file, White's not. And king activity, the king's coming in.
And it's not just about open files, it's not about open ranks. This is what makes Magnus Carlsen perhaps the best endgame player of all times. His pawn structure is ruined on the king side. Double isolated pawns, the f file, and isolated pawn, the h file. But White is sitting passively. The rook on d2 needs to sit there on the second rank. Otherwise, Black gives a check, wins a queenside pawn. If it leaves the d file, the d5 pawn will be loose. And now king g6, king f5, that black king is entering the fray. And if White's king slides on over one square to f2, the black rook slides on over to h3, winning the h4 pawn.
Wesley's going to go down a pawn. It's urgent. If Black gets one more move, two more moves, as you said, Robert, if the black king activates, it's over. So he tries to shut down the entry points for the black king. Black's king now has no way to sneak into the white position. I think a really important move there from Wesley. And Magnus, can he up the pressure? The problem is he's maximized. The black rook is perfect. The black pawns on the queen side cannot really advance any further. His other pawns are stuck. So it's all about the black king and inroads. He needs a route in.
But he is winning a pawn in this position, like we were talking, right? The rook slides back to e5. There is no healthy way to keep that f5 pawn in the position anymore.
No, there isn't. He can go rook e5 right now, but I don't think he will. He goes king f8 because rook e5 isn't going anywhere. It attacks two pawns at the same time. There's only one white rook to defend with it. I love that move, king f8, because what's Wesley's move going to be? If he goes king f2, he may just lose the h pawn, and that's a really valuable passer because it's not doubled f pawns. That f5 pawn is probably going to be lost eventually. Wesley's got to move, and he's down to 20 seconds.
Wow, and a difficult endgame to defend as well.
I love it. I think this might be Zugzwang, and that's a term we say when every move for white worsens his own position. The white king had to step across, but now the black rook goes back, and the pawn drops with check. So even better, why not just give your opponent the move, pass, and they worsen their own position. Wesley's now desperately trying to break open lines, trade off pawns on the queen side. Will Magnus say yes? He doesn't need to decide yet. He does trade a set of pawns. I'm a bit surprised. Maybe he could have kept some tension there, but Magnus now is up a pawn. And can he convert? This is the question. Wesley defending heroically so far, but it's only Magnus who can win this one.
Do not hurry is the theme of this endgame. That king move, king to f8, just making Wesley's position worse. How quickly he's able to create his chances in this endgame, that's taken me by surprise. And we see now Wesley trying to build a kind of a fortress, just relying on the fact that Magnus has the doubled f-pawn, which gives him hope to hold on to this endgame.
A big problem for Magnus Carlsen, all of his pawns are isolated, so you can't get a connected pass pawn situation. He moves his king into the center. This endgame reminds me of the one against Gukesh, which Magnus was able to to outlast the junior, super strong Indian player. But he's going in with his rook. He's going to target the c-pawn as well. But Wesley's getting active, not sitting passively to defend.
That is so important. And now both players are playing on seconds on the clock. Magnus has this amazing ability to recognize equal but difficult to defend endgames and combine that with his sheer will to play on till the end, to just play for a win till the very end. And that's what makes him the greatest player of all times when it comes to endgame. But will it be enough in this one with Wesley getting active?
Ooh, big question. Wesley's king now doing the right thing, marching up the board, forcing the black rook away. But the king's getting driven back now. This one is so close between being a draw and a win for black. Magnus, he's trying, he's probing, but Wesley has all the answers so far. This activity, look at the white king going back where it came from. I think Wesley's defended this perfectly. Under 10 seconds, Magnus now, he might have lost control.
And
White king is coming in.
Yeah, he's using his king as a weapon, and there could be some mating nets around the black king. The rook on a7 makes sure that the black king cannot jump up the board. But now we're going to pass pawns on opposite flanks. Black already has established pass on the b file. White's going to win the h5 pawn. It's going to be a pawn race.
And there's still one extra pawn, but it's all about who gets those pawns moving first. But it looks like Magnus's pawn is closer to queening than Wesley's.
Magnus's pawn is closer, but black's rook is trapped on the wrong side. You always want rooks behind passed pawns. White's rook is keeping that black b pawn under lock and key. And why is he allowed the black pawn to run? His king could have stepped across.
His king could have stepped across, but he was worried about black pushing the b pawn and delivering a check. But right now, can't that pawn go all the way up to f2, and the rook will go to h1 to stop the pawn? It may sacrifice itself, but black's pawn cannot be stopped.
Black's making a new queen. Magnus Carlsen is going to win. Wesley forgot to keep that pawn under watchful gaze, and it's game over. A couple of checks, spite checks. Magnus's king is going to dance easily out of them, and now just prevent the white pawn promoting. We see a check first of all, and Wesley resigns.
Wesley resigns. Magnus Carlsen does Magnus things in the endgame, takes the point, takes the lead in the finals with the black pieces. What a win that was.
It was reticent play from Wesley So, and Magnus Carlsen pounced. He senses it when his opponent doesn't want to strike.